Many Jews had been involved in the Year of Revolutions in 1848, not just because they had learned to read and write in their Hebrew schools, and had gone into business publishing political pamphlets and diatribes in the cheap newspaper, but because when Napoleon had marched across Europe, he'd freed Jews and turned them into equal citizens. The Congress of Vienna in 1814 had put the Jews back in their place, separating them from the Christians of Europe, and the Jews' desire for further revolutions could not be extinguished, and was known as the Jewish emancipation. Many religious Jews thought this was not a good idea, that living in their separate ghettos afforded a sort of protection because assimilation was dangerous on many levels. But revolutionary young Jews went ahead and wrote pamphlets and articles and proposals to the newspapers until these socialists were marching in the streets in 1848, and it started in France and quickly spread to all of Europe. Newspapers loved printing the young socialists' radical articles because it sold plenty of copies of newspapers, and Wagner contributed his share of this activist writing, and when the Year of Revolutions in 1848 hit, the opera house in Dresden was burned down by the revolutionaries, and most of the artistic types had gotten caught up with the rioting, and Wagner had been one of the most visible. When the riots were squelched, a warrant was issued for Wagner's arrest, and perhaps the Jewish complicity in the trouble was what turned Wagner so fiercely anti-Semitic. But Wagner dove completely overboard into the old historical German folklore that used Jews as a foil to spotlight the unscrupulous evildoers in ancient Germanic myths. And Wagner became a hero to the Germanics by pointing to the Jews as an example of what Germany decidedly was not. Wagner composed operas from the old rock songs telling about the search for the Holy Grail and the anonymous Crusader knights. And Lohengrin was where Wagner wrote the Here Comes the Bride music for the wedding scene that became so popular. The same year that Bismarck united Germany in 1870, Bismarck encouraged the fatherland to adopt a flag of red, black, and gold colors that was meant by the gold stripe to include their cultural brothers in Austria, while the official flag had been the red, black, and white colors of Prussia. And Wagner became a national treasure because he was providing the new unified Germanic realm with a definition of what it was to be a German, and the cruel, greedy dwarf in his ring operas might just as well have been a Jew. The big fight between Nietzsche and Wagner had reached a crescendo in 1876 when Wagner read his 20-year-old essay about Jews being evil out loud to a small audience at the opening of the Bayreuth Festival, and the essay said that the decline of German culture had been their fault, and Nietzsche took issue with it. So Wagner began telling people that Nietzsche had gone mad as the result of saying that God was dead, even though that was not at all what Nietzsche had written. It may have been simply that German Jews had been allowed into the universities at the same time Wagner had started composing, and Jews had been allowed to participate in German life for the first time, and Wagner couldn't stand the competition. Wagner wanted the audience to be transformed by his music at the grand opening of Bayreuth, but instead they just got drunk and behaved like any other crowd on vacation. 5 years earlier, as the result of the great national victory in the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, the Kaiser had become the German Emperor, and he came in person to the grand opening of Wagner's Bayreuth Festival, amidst rowdy pomp and circumstance. And this Kaiser Wilhelm I had already been crowned the King of Prussia 10 years earlier in 1861, when his father, Frederick Wilhelm III, died at the age of 65, and Wilhelm I had become the Emperor of Germany in what was now unified with Prussia as the heralded Second Reich. Prussia had been a crusader state of the Teutonic Knights, and was called Teutonic Prussia before the Grand Master converted to Protestantism in 1510, and that had made the state religion Protestant, and Prussia had welcomed Poles fleeing from Poland's Catholics. The Prussians elected the King of Poland to be their liege lord for the new Duchy of Prussia in 1525, and they kept their capital at Königsberg, and the state of Prussia would become a kingdom of its own in 1701. On the 6th of August in 1806, the throne of the Holy Roman Empire would be put away for safekeeping to keep it away from the unbeatable Napoleon, and the Kaiser attended the opening of the Bayreuth Festival 70 years later. And the Kaiser attending the opening of the Bayreuth Festival 70 years later had been 9 years old when the title of the Holy Roman Emperor was put in the closet, and he was holding on to the romantic notion of bringing back the Holy Roman Empire. To prove it, Wilhelm I had the cathedral in Cologne finished by 1880 with the largest facade in the world, and at the time the Cologne Cathedral was also the tallest building, until the Americans put the capstone on the Washington Monument in 1884, although both would be eclipsed by the Eiffel Tower in 1889. Wilhelm I became Emperor of Germany in 1871 at the age of 73. And when crowned the King of Prussia 10 years earlier, the ceremony had been at Königsberg on the anniversary of the Battle of the Nations fought at Leipzig on the 18th of October in 1813. And Wagner's real father had died from typhus a few weeks after fighting in the Battle of the Nations. That had been the turning point where Napoleon had decisively been defeated for the first time. Wilhelm I had been 16 years old during the Battle of the Nations, and he well remembered their victory over the French. And Wilhelm I had been an officer in the Prussian army since the age of 12, and after becoming the Emperor of Germany in 1871, Wilhelm I would live another 17 years until his grandson Wilhelm II became the Kaiser in 1888, and Wilhelm II would lead the fatherland of Germany into the Great War. At first, Germany had imported Britain's railroad technology, but the Germans quickly developed their own by 1850, and they made good railway connections to the ports of Bremen and Hamburg. By 1880, Germany had 10,000 locomotives, and by the Great War they were running their trains over 40,000 miles of railway lines, an increase from the 13,000 miles laid in 1850, and that was second only to America and well above Britain's 20,000 miles of track. When Wilhelm I attended the opening of the Bayreuth Opera House in 1876 as the Emperor of the new united Germany, there was not a single German-speaking person at that time who did not see him as the legitimate Holy Roman Emperor of the unified fatherland that was now being called the Second Reich. The town of Bayreuth had been built up by Frederick the Great's favorite sister Wilhelmina after the devastation of the 30 Years' War. And Wilhelmina had married the Prince of Bayreuth in 1731, and they had only one girl child who was called the most beautiful woman in Germany. But she would suffer an unhappy marriage and have only one child who died at the age of 13 months. Wilhelmina's mother had borne 14 children, among them Frederick the Great, and 10 of her children had lived, and 4 of them had died. And at her wedding to the King of Prussia in 1706, Frederick the Great's mother had participated in a Fackeltans torch dance that had kicked off 6 weeks' worth of banquets and balls, and the wedding had been held in Hanover because Wilhelmina's mother had been the daughter of Britain's King George I. With the resurgence of Germany under Wilhelm I and the Iron Chancellor Bismarck, the Kaiser and his entourage got off the train at Bayreuth in style for the Wagner Festival in 1876, and they came through town with a parade where the Kaiser, quote, could scarcely be seen due to the vast number of banners and wreaths, close quote. Young Nietzsche Becoming a Genius by Karl Pletsch, New York, The Free Press, Macmillan, Inc., 1991, page 199. Much of the German nobility had come for the show at Bayreuth, thinking it was wonderful for Germany that Wagner was bringing the old folk stories and rock songs back to life, but they didn't help pay any of the bills, and when it closed, the Bayreuth Festival would be 150,000 marks in debt. The Ring operas had taken 25 years to write, and they were called music dramas, and took 15 hours to perform, and people did not seem to be transformed by Wagner's music the way he'd intended, but they'd instead simply enjoyed the festival atmosphere. Nietzsche was disgusted, and even more disgusted with Wagner for enjoying it all so much. Marx wrote that Wagner was, quote, the government band leader, close quote, and people began to listen to Wagner for its theme of anti-Semitism, and with his association with Wagner, Nietzsche would be painted with the same brush. In 1882, Nietzsche met Louise von Salome, who had become a friend of Nietzsche's Jewish friend Ria, and that year Lou Salome was 21 years old, and Nietzsche was 38, and Ria was 33, and the three of them would become inseparable for 5 months in that summer of 1882. Nietzsche had a picture taken of the two of them pulling her cart, while Salome whipped them on, and while some said it was a lily branch, others said it was lilac, and it would be this picture that inspired Nietzsche's whip remarks in his Zarathustra. The trio went to Teutoburg for 3 weeks, and Nietzsche took Salome to the monument for the Swiss Guard killed in Paris during the French Revolution, a statue of a lion known as the Blonde Beast, lying dead next to a Swiss shield. And Nietzsche played Beethoven's Ode to Joy for her with plenty of fervor and personality, and Nietzsche offered to marry her 3 times because people were calling her a loose woman, especially because she was living with a Jew. Lou Salome's father was a Russian general who gave her an allowance as long as she stayed single, and the threesome went to the theater and to the opera in Leipzig, where Nietzsche was applying for a lecturing position at the university, but Wagner's smears had taken their toll, and Nietzsche was turned down for the job. The university told him it was because he'd said that God was dead, but Nietzsche had said that the devil said that God was dead, and Salome and Ria left for Paris without Nietzsche, who had just heard that Wagner was dead of a heart attack in Venice in February of 1883. Nietzsche had been taking large doses of opium in 1882, and now he began taking chloral hydrate in 1883, and it was no accident that Nietzsche had taken Salome and Ria to see the lion monument at Teutoburg, because Teutoburg was 35 miles away by train from where Wagner had been putting on his second Bayreuth Festival in May of 1882, having finally finished his definitive version of Parsifal that January. Wagner was already suffering from angina during the 16th and final performance of his Parsifal at Bayreuth on the 29th of August in 1882, and he'd gone into the orchestra pit and taken the baton away from the Jewish conductor to finish the performance himself. And after that, the Wagners had gone to Venice for the winter, where he died of a heart attack at the age of 69, and they made a death mask of him. As soon as Nietzsche heard that Wagner was dead of a bad heart, he began writing Zarathustra, and the complete title of the book was Thus Spake Zarathustra, a Book for Everyone and No One. Salome would marry a professor who stabbed himself in the chest to get her to agree to marry him, and Salome made her husband change his first name to Friedrich. And after she became a friend of the Jewish Dr. Freud, the Nazis would purge her library of Jewish books when she died in Germany in 1937 at the age of 75. 2 years later, having learned the value of motorcycles during his days in the Great War, Hitler started off his own war with 200,000 motorcycles and as many copies of Zarathustra. While living in Turin in 1888, Nietzsche wrote a letter to the Italian king, calling him "my son," and telling him that all anti-Semites had been silenced because Nietzsche's writing had recreated the world. And Nietzsche signed his name "the Crucified One," and it was the Crucified One, which was probably all the Italian wine he was drinking, because Nietzsche had started to sign his letters Dionysus, and he would dance naked in his turret room while the landlady watched through the keyhole. The madness theory was readily taken up by the church people to make it sound as though denying God would certainly drive people mad, and a professor's friend of Nietzsche came to visit him in Turin and took him away to a health sanitarium where he could rest and be taken care of by nice nurses, one facility in Switzerland and another in Jena in Germany. And a photo of Nietzsche, taken a year before he died, showed an ordinary old professor, well-fed and comfortable, and his sister took him home in 1893 to take care of him until he died on the 25th of August in 1900 at the age of 56. Nietzsche died before finishing his book called The Will to Power, so his sister finished it for him, and she published it a year after his death. Nietzsche had left behind scattered pieces of The Will to Power, and he'd intended for it to be his master work, and his sister's version would be very unlike the writing of Nietzsche, and this Will to Power would be the book heralded by the Nazis. Because so much of Germany was just endless miles of flat land, the Flatlanders fell hard for all of Nietzsche's mountain mythology, not unlike Americans on the East Coast going full out over tall tales about the Wild West. Nietzsche's sister exploited her dead brother without mercy, and she burned all the fiction he'd written in high school, and only part of a novel called Euphorion was saved. And Nietzsche's sister would later destroy any correspondence from him that hinted at feelings of love for anyone other than herself. When Nietzsche's sister died in 1935, Hitler wept at her funeral, and he planned to build a monument to Nietzsche, but he would be distracted by the war. Hitler ordered a revised edition of Zarathustra printed up, and had all the anti-Semitism cut out. And Hitler ordered that every German soldier be sent off to battle with a copy, where it would be welcome as precious toilet paper. The mad King Ludwig had become a knight in shining armor in Wagner's operas, and Hitler would listen to Wagner's music and indulge himself in euphoric recall about the days of the vigorous gallant knights. And Hitler believed himself worthy of fulfilling that role for Germany according to the old legend of the great German King Barbarossa, sleeping in a cave somewhere around Salzburg, his beard growing around a stone table as he waited to be awakened. And when that happy day arrived, he would save the world from disaster and chaos. So when Hitler called the invasion of Russia Operation Barbarossa, everyone knew exactly what he meant, and recognized that he was loading a very big cultural gun. Hitler wanted to take away all suffering and illness out of Germany, just as the chivalric heroes had done, beginning with birth defects and the mentally ill, and then moving on to all those who could not participate in his dream of a restored Holy Germanic Kingdom. For the first time since Bismarck's great victory of 1871, and before that all the way back to the time of the Lost Crystal, Hitler tried to reclaim the German people's sacred place in history. And in The Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche wrote, "One pays heavily for coming to power. Power makes stupid. The Germans, once they were called the people of thinkers, do they think at all today? The Germans are now bored with the spirit. The Germans now mistrust the spirit. Politics swallows up all serious concern for really spiritual matters. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles." I fear that was the end of German philosophy. The Portable Nietzsche, selected and translated with an introduction, prefaces, and notes, translated by Walter Kaufmann. New York, The Viking Press, 1954-1967, page 506. what the German spirit might be. Who has not had his melancholy ideas about that? But this people has deliberately made itself stupid for nearly a millennium. Nowhere have the two great European narcotics, alcohol and Christianity, been abused more dissolutely. Recently even a third has been added, one that alone would be sufficient to dispatch all fine and bold flexibility of the spirit: music. Our constipating German music. How much disgruntled heaviness, lameness, dampness, dressing gown, how much beer there is in the German intelligence. The Portable Nietzsche, page 506 and 7. But at some future time, a time stronger than our effete self-doubting present, the true Redeemer will come, whose surging creativity will not let him rest in any shelter or hiding place, whose solitude will be misinterpreted as a flight from reality, whereas it will in fact be a dwelling in reality, so that when he comes forth into the light he may bring with him the redemption of that reality from the curse placed upon it by a lapsed ideal. This man of the future, who will deliver us both from a lapsed ideal and from all that this ideal has spawned: violent loathing, the will to extinction, nihilism, this great and decisive stroke of midday, who will make the will free once more and restore to the earth its aim and to man his hope, this Antichrist and anti-nihilist, conqueror of both God and unbeing. One day he must come. But why go on? I've reached the term of my speech. To continue here would be to usurp the right of one younger, stronger, more pregnant with future than I am, the right of Zarathustra, impious Zarathustra. The Birth of Tragedy and the Genealogy of Morals, translated by Francis Golfing, New York. Doubleday Bantam, Anchor Books, Dell Publishing, 1956, page 229 and 30. Nietzsche translated flatly into English, and into French he took on an additional dimension. And his understanding of anarchy was not people running amok in the streets, but puffy people sitting behind desks every day without doing any good. For the French poets, there was either boredom or anguish, a feeling of being caught up and pummeled around dangerously within an inch of life, and then miraculously being spared, and the whew that escaped one's lips was the same feeling as the first bite of a cold beer, not the warm dagger of a brandy, but that narrow miss of having escaped a certain demise, followed by the fresh feeling of newly recovered freedom, and the whew would get flat and stale and predictable without the presence of danger. But mostly, the French poets were motivated by a fear of going crazy. After hearing all this French blather, the Americans didn't care whether or not Hitler marched into Paris. And Nietzsche had read these French poets and had absorbed their notion of the crest line and the ecstatic revelation of the impossible, that blurred the boundaries of reality and freed them from remaining too cautious or too predictable. And half the fun of opposing the Nazis occupying France was the fact that sometimes their poetic endeavors resulted in death.